By all accounts, we've got a featherweight banger going down in Singapore this weekend. And maybe a couple years ago, 5 years ago or so, this fight between Max Holloway and Chan Sung Jung, the Korean Zombie, would have had fans everywhere really excited, as both of these fighters have spent a lot of time at the top of the division, lots of consecutive main events, but for whatever reason, and some of those reasons I understand, this main event has mixed reactions and a lot of negative pushback, mainly because of the perception that this is going to be a one-sided fight for Max Holloway. So in this video, I'm gonna go over actually the whole entire UFC Singapore card, give you prediction on each fight, and eventually get to the main event where I give my thoughts on the Korean Zombie versus Max Holloway, and trying in my mind to perceive some kind of scenario where the Korean Zombie could actually pull out a win against the former champion. Now, I'm not going to get down in the weeds for every single fight because that would just take way too long, but I did do research on every single fight and every single fighter, so I can hopefully give a little bit of an informed opinion about some narratives, some storylines behind each fight, how we might expect it to go. So let's get into some fights. All right, now the first fight opening up the event is Choi Sung-woo of Korea against Jarno Aarons. The power advantage and likelihood of a knockout I give to Choi, while the grappling advantage I will give to Jarno Aarons of the Netherlands. Aarons, he holds a judo black belt. Both guys have had mixed success in the UFC so far. Choi has been around a lot longer, has a much better reputation for being able to hang with UFC talent, and he has decent takedown defense, so I'm gonna lean towards him since I give him the power and striking advantage. My pick for that fight is Choi Sung-woo to beat Jarno Aarons by decision. Now the next fight is JJ Aldrich against Liang Na. So this is an interesting one. Liang Na hasn't had a great UFC career so far and has been finished twice in the first round. She is hyper aggressive and loves to go for the arm bar. Ronda Rousey is her hero, but because she trains exclusively at Longyuan MMA in China, she isn't really on Western social media, so she stays really out of the limelight. It's kind of hard to know what her training is like. By contrast, JJ Aldrich hasn't finished a fight since 2016, but holds recent wins over fighters much better than Liang Na, like Vanessa Demopoulos and Jillian Robertson. She basically can just run the Jillian Robertson playbook to land strikes at will on the feet, although honestly JJ Aldrich doesn't have the best punching power, so I think probably this will go to a decision. Liang Na is really wild, so she could try and drop Aldrich with a looping punch or even pull guard to work for the submission finish. But otherwise, I think we're just going to see Aldrich outstrike Liang Na on the feet towards a decision. The third fight of UFC Singapore is Yusaku Kinoshita versus Billy Goff. Billy Goff and Kinoshita are both veterans of 2022's season of Dana White's Contender Series. Both guys really young, exciting. Kinoshita is 23, Goff is 25. Goff has yet to debut in the UFC, and I'm really excited for his UFC career. Goff did take a lot of damage in his Contender Series fight. He was nearly finished with a head kick right away, but ultimately his toughness, his resilience won out. He's got really good boxing, pushes a really fast pace on his opponents, whereas Kinoshita has been training at Kill Cliff FC, I believe since his first UFC fight. Kinoshita is loose, he uses a karate stance, so I think he hits quite a bit harder than Goff from what I can tell. I see this probably going into round 3, if not the whole distance, with Goff's work rate and volume boxing ultimately sealing the fight for him, but he'll likely have some dicey moments where he gets caught. I think this should be a really fun fight, should be back and forth. I think Goff might get the decision here, but wouldn't be surprised if Kinoshita is able to put things together and get the finish as well, but the pick is Goff by decision. All right, next up is Song Kanan versus Rolando Bedoya. Guy fighting in his second UFC fight versus Song Kanan, who is fighting, I believe, in his 8th UFC fight. So different ends of the experience spectrum. Song has been training at Kill Cliff FC since the spring. He's coming off a loss to Ian Machado Gary, which now we know more and more how good he is, so that's not anything to be ashamed of, especially coming off of a long layoff. His wins in the UFC aren't over the highest level of competition, despite having 4 of them, but all of his losses are also to top tier welterweights. He was really hesitant in his last fight with Ian Machado Gary, but I expect in this fight to see him a little bit more warmed up and more active, especially against Rolando Bedoya. Bedoya went to a split decision in his UFC debut against Chaos Williams. Lots of high volume, also took a lot of punches. He doesn't always have the best striking defense and keeps his hands low, but he also has a pretty good chin. This could be a pretty entertaining fight, and I could see both guys striking away to the final bell, with Bedoya landing in greater volume from the beginning of the fight. Probably going to take Bedoya by decision here, just by his resilience, his volume. He's going to get in Song Kanon's face and throw a lot of punches, but Song Kanon has really good power, so wouldn't be surprised to see a knockout from him. But just given how good Bedoya's chin is, I am picking him by decision. All right, this is a good one. Mikhail Oleksiejczuk versus Chidi Njokuani. This is one of the hardest fights, honestly, for me to pick from the whole event, as both of these middleweights are sitting around the same position in the middleweight division. Both are coming off losses, and it's honestly for me a little bit of a pick'em fight. Regardless, the knock on Oleksiejczuk has been his ground game. He can look pretty lost on the ground and has lost 3 times by submission in the UFC. Njokuani's BJJ black belt doesn't match up particularly well there, so if I'm him, I'm trying as hard as I can to get this fight down to the ground as soon as possible. The problem is that I haven't seen Njokuani try and wrestle very much in the UFC so far, and he's only attempted 1 takedown in all 4 of his UFC fights so far. Because of that, he's likely to try and test himself against the striking of Oleksiejczuk. Mikhail has a beautiful jab, and I think that we'll probably see him fight behind that over 3 rounds to pick up a decision. This could be a really violent fight. Maybe we'll get to see Njokuani try and use his grappling. Honestly, if I were him, I don't know how you don't build a game plan around that, but Njokuani also has pretty good striking, so I think he's probably going to hang there, but the pick for me is Mikhail Oleksiejczuk by decision. All right, now we've got a runner-up in last year's Road to UFC Bantamweight tournament. This is Toshiomi Kazama of Japan fighting Garrett Armfield. Immediately when I look at this fight, the biggest thing that I see is the brilliant submission game of Kazama. He may have been knocked out in his Road to UFC finals fight, but I think he's still a pretty solid fighter. Meanwhile, Garrett Armfield is dropping down to his natural class of bantamweight, but he's also lost his last 2 fights and 2 of his 3 total by submission. So I'm looking for Kazama to try and tie up Armfield and get him to the ground with his judo, working for the submission at the end of round 1. My pick is Toshiomi Kazama defeating Garrett Armfield by submission in round 1. Capping off the prelims, we've got a heavyweight fight between Waldo Cortez Acosta fighting Lucas Bresky. Both guys coming from the Contender Series, both guys coming off a loss. This is another semi-close fight, and it's an opportunity for one of these heavyweights to get back in the win column, but I'm leaning towards Waldo Cortez Acosta here, despite Bresky's big reach advantage, mainly because of Cortez Acosta's advantage in hitting harder and faster, and overall he's just got much cleaner boxing. This fight could have some stalling moments, but ultimately I'm higher overall on Cortez Acosta as a prospect, and I think he's probably going to take this one by decision just on the merit of better boxing, more volume. So Cortez Acosta by decision. All right, we're flying through these. First up on the main card, we've got Junior Tafa fighting Parker Porter. This should be a crazy way to open up the main card of UFC Singapore. Junior Tafa is 12 years younger than Parker Porter and has 17 fewer pro MMA fights. Despite that, he has faced really good competition in all of his fights. He's already fought for Ryzen and Brave, and in his UFC debut, we got a really powerful wrestler in Muhammad Usman. So now they're giving him an opponent that should allow him to really shine with his striking and put on a really entertaining fight for the fans. So this for me is another pick'em fight. It's going to be a heavyweight brawl. The clinch and ground game is always there for Porter, who has a BJJ brown belt, but as we've seen from Parker Porter, he just wants to stand up and brawl. So I have a feeling he's going to prefer to strike in this one, and most likely the technical strikes of Tafa should win the day here and get him a first round knockout. We could see this go the distance, but I think Tafa is going to be able to find that massive kill shot. First round knockout for Junior Tafa. All right, one of the most interesting fights on this whole card, and almost tragic that it's not even a co-main event when it actually was once scheduled as a UFC main event, is the Taila Santos versus Erin Blanchfield fight. This is a tough fight to pick because honestly, Santos is a really tough matchup for Erin Blanchfield in a lot of ways, or for anyone of that matter. I mean, we saw how tough of a fight she was able to give to Valentina Shevchenko. So Blanchfield so far seems like she can strike, she can wrestle, and she can submit anyone that's been put in front of her. Against Santos, she may have met her match in terms of grappling. Santos is also a BJJ black belt and was able to take Valentina Shevchenko down several times and control her for long periods of time. So she's a really physical opponent, and I doubt we see Blanchfield able to dominate in the grappling. However, if the grappling is nullified between the two, Blanchfield may have better success striking against Santos. Against Shevchenko, Santos really had nothing to offer the former champion and hardly even threw any strikes on the feet. Since this fight is 3 rounds instead of 5, as it originally was scheduled, it's even harder to predict. I think Blanchfield will probably outstrike Taila Santos over the duration of the fight to get a decision, but Santos is going to make for every bit of it, dragging her into the clinch and through scrambles on the mat. But I think Erin Blanchfield probably going to win this fight by decision. All right, in the middle of the main card is a great prospect in Rinya Nakamura fighting Fernie Garcia from the Contender Series. When I first heard about this fight, it felt like a little bit of a gimme fight for Nakamura, as he's undefeated at 7-0, he's got 6 finishes, and Garcia's dropped his first 2 UFC fights. At the same time, Fernie Garcia has never been finished. And as I watch them fight, I think that Fernie Garcia could give Nakamura a run for his money, even though I am heavily siding with Nakamura still. I think Fernie Garcia is probably going to make Nakamura work for everything. Brady Highstand took him down several times, but not after defending the shot. So for Nakamura, he's just got to keep driving for the shot. Garcia does have pretty good takedown defense, but you just have to keep driving and driving and driving. Garcia's punches are pretty accurate and he hits decently hard, but Nakamura should be able to dictate the pace of this fight, pull it wherever he wants to go. I think that he'll probably be able to get things to the ground. Maybe we get to see a Nakamura submission, but from what I've seen of Garcia, he's a really tough guy, and I think probably Nakamura will win a decision. Going into the top portion of the main card, one of the toughest fights to pick is the Giga Chikadze fight against Alex Caceres, at least for me. This one's really tricky for me. Giga, we all know he's an elite striker. Caceres has only been finished once in his 34 fight career by strikes. So the question that seems to guide a lot of predictions for Giga, at least in the past, seem to be about taking him down to the mat, which oddly enough, not a lot of UFC fighters have been able to take him down. A lot haven't even tried incredibly hard, and others just didn't even have time in the fight before they were knocked out. See, like Cub Swanson. Calvin Kattar was able to get Giga to the ground, but that was mostly just after a slip from a head kick from Giga. And in none of the 4 fights before the Calvin Kattar fight, no one had gotten Giga to the ground, and several didn't even try. Giga seems to have gotten really good at keeping his hips away from his opponent, and also really good at getting back up to his feet if he does get taken down. Alex Caceres hasn't always shown us that he's going to build a game plan around takedowns, so I wouldn't necessarily expect him to do that, but we could see him take the back of Giga or try and drag him down to the mat. If there's a scramble on the feet, they get pushed up against the fence. Alex Caceres is a really tricky guy, and he could eventually find a way to grab onto Giga and pull him down. If I were him, that's what I would try and build my strategy around. But Caceres also has a lot of confidence on his feet, so he may just try and strike with Giga. If he's going to do that, I think Giga's going to land the more accurate and powerful shots. And I'm leaning towards Giga Chikadze to win a decision against Alex Caceres, but Caceres, really tricky guy, still improving, so he could surprise us here, but leaning towards Giga here. All right, up to the co-main event, we've got a rematch between Anthony Lionheart Smith and Superman Ryan Spann. These guys fought 2 years ago, and that fight was so chaotic and back and forth that this second fight was merited, apparently. I'm guessing they're fighting again just because the availability of other ranked opponents. And apparently there was some really intense heat right after their last, with Anthony Smith yelling a bunch of stuff at Ryan Spann. Not really sure what that was about. The question in this fight is how much has the gap narrowed between the two in the last 2 years? I'm not really sure if I have a sure answer to that. It seemed like in the first fight, fight, it was in the most like basic way you could outline the fight, the power of Ryan Spann against the grappling of Anthony Smith. I know both guys have their moments in every department, so it's not quite that simple. But what I did see was that Smith got really wild with his striking, and he got caught for it. Clocked a few times by Ryan Spann, but every time the fight dropped to the mat, Smith's superior grappling eventually took over, which eventually led him to the rear naked choke finish in the first round. My guess with this fight this time around is that Smith will be a little bit more cautious and a little bit more methodical to get Ryan Spann down to the ground again. Spann most likely will be trying to replicate his success in the first fight and draw Smith into a brawl, but I think Anthony Smith probably going to take this by first or second round submission. I expect that the pace should be a lot slower in this fight. And Smith, yeah, he might get clocked a few times again, but I think he's gonna get this fight to the ground and submit Ryan Spann. All right, into the main event, Max Blessed Holloway against the Korean Zombie Chan Sung Jung. A lot of negative fan reaction to this fight, as Max Holloway just seems like the worst possible matchup for the Korean Zombie. A lot of people think that Korean Zombie may retire after this fight. Originally, he was supposed to have this fight in Seoul, South Korea earlier in February this year. That whole entire event ultimately got nixed, and there was some rumors, unconfirmed, but some rumors that it could have been Korean Zombie's retirement fight. And I think a lot of people were wanting a much easier opponent that could have at least given him a competitive fight, if not a win in his retirement. But instead, he's literally taking on the second hardest guy in the whole division. So some of the negative feedback I don't totally understand, because it's not like the Korean Zombie is on some massive career skid. He has won 3 of his last 5 fights, and his last fight was a title fight. So it's not like he's at the end of his career necessarily just by the merit of being knocked out over and over. It's honestly been a while since he was cleanly knocked out. Even his last fight against Alexander Volkanovski, he took a ton of damage, and the fight was actually stopped on the feet just as the referee had seen enough, didn't want to see Zombie take any more punishment. It's not like the end of Frankie Edgar's career where he was just getting knocked out viciously over and over again. So in some ways, I don't necessarily see the negative blowback. Both guys are still in the top 10. Although, yeah, like there's probably a lot of guys in that top 10 that could beat Zombie right now. So I'm gonna spoil it. Yeah, I already think that Max Holloway is gonna beat Korean Zombie. But my real question is there any path to victory for the Korean Zombie in this fight? If I'm watching Max Holloway's fights, I'm not seeing a whole lot of weaknesses, to be honest. As I was looking over Korean Zombie's last couple fights, what I saw from him was a lot of intelligence and a lot of experience being expressed just through cage generalship. He knows how to pace a fight. When a fight is flexing one way, he knows how to flex back and get things back where he wants them. He's honestly got some pretty good takedowns. He's been working with Henry Cejudo on that. Although for this fight, he has been back in South Korea, sending some video and voice messages back to Eddie Cha. So he is kind of still working with him in some regard, but he's kept his training camp in South Korea. And maybe that'll be good for him since this fight is also in Asia. He's got plenty of really good strikes. He's got a good straight right hand. He's got a good uppercut. Obviously, we know from Korean Zombie, he's got incredible resilience. So I think that's kind of what fans were nervous about, is the high volume that Max Holloway tends to put out against the resilience of Korean Zombie. Could make for a pretty ugly picture and a very one-sided fight. But honestly, if I were Korean Zombie, I would think about, is there any way I can get this fight to the mat? Max Holloway has really good takedown defense, but Korean Zombie has really good takedowns and he has really good back control. So if I were Korean Zombie, that's how I would approach this fight. I would not be trying to match Max Holloway strike for strike. I don't know if I would necessarily put all my eggs in the basket of knocking him out either. There's not a lot of paths to victory here, but if I were Zombie, I would try to replicate some of the success that Volkanovski had and work some of the grappling. Zombie's really resilient. He's really good at recovery, good at bouncing back. But one concerning thing that I've seen the last couple fights from Zombie is it seems like his speed has definitely slowed down. Saw that in the Dan Ige fight, saw that in the Alexander Volkanovski fight. Just seems like he isn't able to keep up with a lot of the younger guys in the division. So if you're not gonna try and submit Max Holloway, another strategy that Zombie could have is just to try and take out Max Holloway early, to try and just throw the kitchen sink at him right away. Some opponents actually have some success against Max Holloway when they apply a lot of pressure on him. So Zombie could try and just take Max Holloway out in that first round and push an insane pace on him and just try and get Max uncomfortable from the starting bell. Not saying that's gonna work, but Zombie doesn't have a lot of options in my view. And for Max Holloway, the path is clear. Just do what you do best, strike. Throw lots of strikes in rapid combination. And I think Max Holloway probably gonna get a second or third round TKO. I'd say probably round 3 just based off of the Korean Zombie's resilience. Hopefully if it's an absolute beatdown, I just don't want to see the ref let this go too long. I'm with you all. I don't love this fight, but I do understand Zombie's perspective in this and wanting to fight the best possible opponent when he's likely to have a lot more fans from Korea in the crowd in Singapore. I do understand his perspective, even though I don't agree with it. I wish that if he's going to retire, he would have chosen someone either from the bottom of the top 15 or even outside the rankings, someone who's a little bit comparable to him in age. So, you know, maybe like a Cub Swanson would have been a lot of fun. Either way, just hoping for, at the very least, a good fight, some competition. But yeah, guys, looking forward to this event. Looking forward to getting up at 2 a.m. here on the West Coast of the US. Honestly, these are the kind of events that I live for. So stay locked to MMA ecosystem for all of the latest updates, news on Asian MMA, UFC, all that good stuff. Got the podcast on every Thursday. And we'll see you next time. Enjoy the fights.